Greetings from Redefined Church. I'm Joel Van Briggle, and I'm delighted you've chosen to be with us today. Redefined Church is a gathering of people from many different nations and various backgrounds who are exploring faith at the intersection of life, community, and mission. Our desire is that you sense that you belong. Whether you've been attending church for many years or you've never come to church before, we want you to know that you belong. If you'd like to speak with someone about furthering your journey and perhaps needing prayer, we want to connect with you. Drop us a message and we would love to connect with you to help you take next steps. You are also always welcome at our in-person gatherings at our Overijse campus and our Tervuren campus. Check our social media and website for all the details. We look forward to connecting with you. And now, today's message. Everyone likes a happily ever after story. Now, not all stories end with a happily ever after. In fact, as we have been journeying with Joshua, we've been navigating some pretty incredible episodes in Joshua's life. But the truth is, we're only looking at the very first part of his life, or the first part of his journey into the promised land. And there are four key components that we've been looking at that were critical for that place of moving from the desert and wandering in the desert to the place of receiving the promise that came to Joshua's ancestors and to Moses and to the people of Israel. And so as we see Joshua moving along in these places, it required commitment, it required courage, it required consecration. And today we're looking at the word connection. Now, we've been looking at connection, and we think about the word connection. I often use that word relationally, like we connect with one another. But today we're going to be using that word as connection as an attachment to the moment in a journey, to a moment in a journey. And as we do, we recognize that there are particular moments in life that leave a lasting memory. Now, not all of those moments can be positive moments, but oftentimes there are moments where they can be painful or life-altering. But there are also beautiful moments that happen where you see God's intersection in your life, and you can see how God protected you or preserved you or perhaps gave you a blessing. Just this past week on Friday, we celebrated Emily's 17th birthday. That is a moment when we look back and we celebrate that moment because our lives were changed forever and in such a beautiful way. And we're just so grateful for that. And all of us have moments in our life where those things happen, where episodes or experiences happen that we have memory of it. And connection was certainly something that was important for Joshua, a connected moment to the past that would lead them to faith in the present and into the future. And so we see in Joshua chapter 4, Joshua made connection an intentional act. in relationship to his obedience to God as God had commanded. So the Israelites, when we come to Joshua chapter 4, as you remember last week, they had consecrated themselves, and the week before that, they had sent spies in, and Rahab had hid the spies, and that wonderful story. In the first week, knowing that they were going to be facing all sorts of obstacles, God had reminded Joshua to be strong and courageous, and even the army echoed those words. And so we see God woven through all of this, all through this journey of Joshua's. And as they advance towards Jericho, and now God has parted the waters of the Jordan, and just like he had done with the Red Sea coming out of Egypt. But it's important for us to recognize that no one traveling with Joshua would have crossed the Red Sea out of Egypt. That was a generation or two before this group, but they would have heard the story over and over how God had parted the waters of the sea. And it's an important part of their oral tradition. They would have heard those stories, but now they've experienced crossing on dry ground, crossing the Jordan. So we pick up in Joshua chapter 4. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carrying them over with you, and put them down in a place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you take up a stone on your shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." What a powerful moment that God is establishing here, and Joshua is establishing as a place of connection. And there's all sorts of layers to the connection with the past here, because the priests were designated to carry the Ark of the Covenant, and they stood at the center of the Jordan River while the people crossed. Now, the Ark of the Covenant, Pastor Gale alluded to last week, is a wooden box completely covered in gold. And there were some contents in there. There were a couple stone tablets that had the 10 Commandments. There was Aaron's rod, Aaron was kind of the right hand of Moses. And there was a jar of manna. And all of these things that were in the ark were representing things of the past, were representing how God had provided, how God was with them. And it was also the place where Moses would talk to God. The ark was kept in the inner court of what was called the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle was a sacred tent that was established. You understand that the Israelite people were nomadic. They lived in tents, and so their place of worship was a very large tent that God had constructed and ordered them how to create it. And the ark sat in the middle, and it was a place where Moses would talk with God and God would talk with Moses. So certainly the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant were the most sacred items that the Israelites had. And so they were, as we look at this, the fourth component was clearly important. That connection piece was clearly important in Moses' generation as they carried the ark around, remembering God's law and remembering how God had provided. But it was also important in Joshua's generation. And the truth is, it's important in our generation. Let's pick up in verse number 8. Verse number 8 says, "So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took the 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of tribes of Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over to where their camp was, and when they put them down, Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood. And they are there to this day. Do you see how these stones created a connection between the past, between the present, and the future? They were in that present moment saying, we will remember the past, but we will also help future generations know about our God. Verse number 10, now the priest who carried the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people. Just as Moses had directed Joshua, the people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the ark of the Lord and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. Now, I made a special note in my notes for that while they watched. You have to remember a couple things. Seeing the ark was pretty special. It was usually just in the inner court where only the high priest would see at once a year. And we recognize that this is a moment where the ark is out in front of them and they're getting to see it. And now it's in the middle of the Jordan. And now it's coming across the Jordan. It must have been a momentous thing to see. And so, as we said, their journey took commitment and it took courage. Picking up in verse number 12, the men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, ready for battle, in front of the Israelites as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. For that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all of Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. Now, I want you to understand that the people had begun to experience this because they had followed in courage. They had been committed to one another and committed to what God had said to them. They were courageous and they were consecrated. And in that moment, Joshua, in his obedience, God elevated him and anointed him, and people revered him. They embraced his leadership because God had put his hand upon his life. It was a beautiful moment, and now this moment of connection where they're bringing all the pieces together and these stones coming together. Verse 15 says this, then the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord to come up out of the Jordan. So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan, and the priests came up out of the river, carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. Now, I want to make a small note here because I think it's so important. So many skeptics say that crossing the Jordan would have been impossible, or that it was in drought stage, or that the dry ground was already there. They just found a place to cross. No, you cannot explain this away. It was a miracle of God. And even the scripture tells us that it was the river was in flood stage. That's how incredible God is. And I can tell you that the things that you face in your journey that seem like impossibilities are not impossible with God. And we don't even have to explain them away. We can recognize that God is a God of miracles. It was not dry season. They crossed over during flood season. It was a miracle of God. Verse 19. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and camped at Gilgal, on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones that had taken out of the Jordan. Gilgal was a point of camping where they had come before they were entering into Jericho. It was a spot, and it was known as the Circle of Stones. And it was a place of connection. It was a place where they had gathered. It's a place where they put memorial of these 12 stones. And isn't it beautiful? It's in a circle because a circle is unbroken. It is unending. It's why a wedding ring is round and why a ring symbolizes the eternal covenant. He said to the Israelites in verse 21, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground, for the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the peoples of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God.'" This was a present location where the people of Israel would take note of the miracle that brought them to this place. It was a connection to the future because all future generations could look and see at this place what God had done as they shared their story with one another. It was a connection to the past to remind them that moving forward, that God was with them every step of the way. Now, as we think about our own journey and we think about our own life, have you been intentional about marking the moments of intersection between your life and God? Are there moments that you can look back and you can see how God was working, even maybe when you didn't know he was at work? What are the moments that you may have forgotten to place a stone? Maybe a place in your life where you haven't really placed that stone of remembrance. What are the most meaningful moments when God clearly was at work in your life? And the question that I have for you is, have you shared your journey with anyone else? How will the next generation be able to connect with your journey and the ways in which God impacted your life unless you set up those moments and those places of remembrance? Can I encourage you today, think back to those moments and say, God, I want to place stones of memory. I want to leave a place of remembrance in my heart of where you have intersected my life. And I want to be able to share that story with the next generation. I want to be able to share that story with other people who may be journeying along. You see, your journey is not wasted. The places that you've gone, the experiences you've had, those are things that shape who you are. I always say that my history is his story. You see, God is writing that story in you. As we journey with Joshua, I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you that you need to see these four components for what they are, to see a moment where you need to be committed to God and say, God, I want to commit to you. I want to walk in courage today. I need to be consecrated and set apart for whatever you have ahead of me. And God, I'll be quick to make a connection point so that I can always remember that my faith can build and that I can stand strong today and that future generations will know that you are God. Lord, I come to you today and I pray that, Lord, for those who are here and maybe just starting their faith journey, God, I pray that today a stone would be placed in their hearts and their lives today, that they would recognize that you are intersecting with them right now, that you love them, that, Lord, you're desiring to bring forgiveness and healing, and you're desiring to have a relationship restored. And in this faith moment, that a stone is placed in their lives of transformation where you met them today. And God, for those who have journeyed maybe many years, God, I pray that we would set those stones in place, that we would be mindful and intentional about remembering the things that you've done, and more importantly, sharing it with the next generation. Give us courage to speak forth your story through us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Thank you so much for joining us here at Redefined Church. If you have any questions or want prayer, we encourage you to send us a private message. We would be happy to connect with you and to pray with you to help you in your faith journey. Make sure this week to get a hold of the Redefining Moments. You can find those on our website and on our Facebook page. It's a daily prayer and Bible reading guide designed to help you grow and in your walk with Jesus Christ. Make sure that you check out our website so that you can see everything that's happening and to be part of that here at Redefined Church. May God bless you, and we hope that you have an incredible week.